Let's be clear, my manager said. Smiling at the client across the glass table, the strategy pivot was my call. I felt every eye in the room shift slightly toward him, then away from me. Because I was the one who had built that pivot. The late nights. The revisions, the risk models. The backup deck sitting open on my laptop. He didn't even look in my direction when he said it. Just a calm voice. Confident posture. Perfect ownership. And I remember thinking, not angrily, but very quietly, he really believes no one will ever ask. If you've ever watched your work walk out of the room wearing someone else's name, you'll understand why I didn't interrupt him right there. Because that moment was uncomfortable. But it was also only the beginning. I work in a mid-sized consulting firm in Chicago, structured hierarchy, polished presentations, carefully managed reputations. I was the analyst who stayed late, not the one who spoke the most in meetings. My manager Daniel was known for being articulate, charming, strategic, very visible. I was known for being reliable. That word sounds like praise, until you realize it often means invisible. For 3 months, I led the back-end development of a major client project, market analysis, data synthesis, scenario planning. Daniel reviewed the decks, then presented them. At first, I told myself that was normal, that was the structure. But the first escalation happened during a Monday internal review. The senior leadership team joined the call. Cameras on, notes open. Daniel flipped to slide 17, my slide. My framework identifies 3 core risks, he said smoothly. No pause, no acknowledgement, no reference to my name on the draft file. I didn't correct him, I simply took notes. Because correcting him publicly would have shifted the narrative. And I wasn't interested in drama. I was interested in patterns. That detail mattered more than anyone realized. After that meeting, he started looping me less into client calls, but increased his requests for quick revisions, late emails, last-minute changes, then polished presentations under his name. And yet, I stayed calm, not passive, observant. Because something about the consistency felt deliberate, and I needed to understand how far it would go. The second escalation came during my quarterly performance review. He leaned back in his chair and said, gently, "You're strong technically, but leadership presence is still developing." I nodded. He continued, "Clients respond better to confident delivery." I almost smiled at that, because I had delivered every internal walkthrough he requested. Privately. Just not publicly. I asked one simple question. Is there any feedback from the client on my work quality? He hesitated, just briefly. Then said, they appreciate the team's output. The team. That word again. I left the room without arguing. Without defending myself. Because arguing would have framed me as emotional. And I had learned something important by then. Silence in professional spaces is often misread as agreement. But it can also be documentation. I started saving version histories, time-stamped files, email threads with attached drafts before each presentation, not to expose him, but to protect the truth. And that distinction changed everything. Weeks passed. The project moved into its final phase. The client scheduled a high-stakes strategy meeting at their headquarters. Senior stakeholders. Executive presence. Full room. Daniel was excited. He rehearsed the narrative repeatedly. Our methodology, our framework, our analysis. I noticed the wording. But I said nothing, because by then, I had seen enough to recognize a pattern forming. But I still didn't know how it would end. The meeting room was bright. Glass walls. Long oak table. Water glasses aligned. Notebooks opened. Daniel presented confidently, clear voice, smooth pacing. Slide after slide of my work. I watched quietly, occasionally adjusting a data chart when he asked, like an assistant, even though I had built the model from scratch. And then, something unexpected happened. The client's lead director leaned forward. She didn't look at Daniel first. She looked at me and asked, "Who actually ran the risk simulations behind this model?" The room went very still. Daniel answered quickly. "Our team collaborated closely on the analytical side." Collaborated. That word landed softly, but heavily. And in that exact moment, I realized something critical. The client wasn't confused. They were observant. That was the mini turning point. Because they followed up with, "I'm asking because the assumptions changed between version 2 and version 4, and the logic improved significantly." Version 2 and version 4, those versions were mine. Daniel glanced at me for the first time that day. A quick, assessing look. I didn't interrupt him. I didn't claim credit emotionally. Instead, I opened my laptop calmly. "Would it help if I walk through the simulation logic?" I asked, not defensive, not loud, just factual. The director nodded immediately, and what happened next shifted the room's perception without a single confrontation. I explained the model step by step. Assumptions, constraints, sensitivity analysis, short sentences, clear logic, no exaggeration, no one interrupted. Halfway through, the director smiled slightly. "This is extremely thorough." Daniel stayed quiet, and that silence said more than any argument ever could. "Can I ask you something? If you were in that room, would you have interrupted earlier, or waited like I did?" Because the main climax didn't come from exposure. It came from realization. At the end of the session, the client said calmly, "We'd like her included in future strategic discussions directly. Not dramatically, not confrontationally, just a professional decision." Daniel nodded. Of course he did. But the social dynamic had already shifted. Later that evening, an email arrived from the client's office. Subject line, "Follow-up and appreciation." They specifically referenced the analyst who built the simulation framework. My name was mentioned. Directly, no corrections, no disputes, no emotional scenes, just documented recognition. The next internal meeting felt different, subtle, but unmistakable. Leadership began asking me questions directly, looping me into early drafts, requesting my perspective before presentations. Daniel remained professional, but noticeably quieter when discussing project ownership. He never apologized, and honestly, he didn't need to, because the truth had already adjusted the narrative for him. Not through confrontation, through consistency. Looking back, I understand something many people misunderstand about workplace credit. Correction in the moment feels powerful, but clarity over time is more permanent. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't accuse. I didn't create tension. I stayed calm, documented my work, and let the environment reveal the reality naturally. And that client's one simple question did what arguments never could. It made the room see. Now, when someone says I lack leadership presence, I don't react defensively, because I've learned that leadership is not always volume. Sometimes it's composure under quiet pressure. Sometimes it's restraint when misrepresented. And sometimes it's trusting that truth doesn't need to rush, it only needs the right moment. If this story resonated with you, you're not alone. And if you've ever been quietly underestimated, stay observant. Because recognition, when it finally arrives without force, lasts far longer than any loud correction ever will.